On a chilly autumn night, I was walking home after visiting a friend's house. It was almost midnight, and the streets were deserted. I lived on Elm Street, a quiet neighborhood with old houses and big trees that cast eerie shadows under the moonlight. As I turned onto Elm Street, I noticed an old woman standing at the corner, leaning on a cane. She wore a tattered shawl and a dress that looked like it was from another era. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, staring straight at me. I felt a shiver run down my spine but tried to ignore her and kept walking. When I was a few feet away from her, she suddenly spoke. "Beware the shadows, child. They come alive at midnight." Her voice was a chilling whisper that echoed in the silent street. I nodded politely, trying to hide my fear, and walked past her. But as I did, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength and repeated, "Beware the shadows." I pulled away and hurried down the street, my heart pounding. The closer I got to my house, the more I felt like I was being watched. The shadows cast by the trees seemed to move and shift unnaturally. I glanced back and saw the old woman still standing at the corner watching me. I quickened my pace, desperate to get home. As I reached my front porch, I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I finally managed to unlock the door and rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and I heard a soft whispering sound. I turned around and saw shadows creeping along the walls, moving toward me. I remembered the old woman's warning and felt a wave of terror wash over me. I backed away, but the shadows followed, growing darker and more menacing. They seemed to have a life of their own, writhing and twisting as they closed in on me. In a panic, I ran to the living room and turned on every light, hoping to banish the shadows. For a moment, the room was bright, and the shadows receded. But then, the lights flickered again and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispering grew louder, and I felt a cold breath on my neck. I screamed and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I hid under the covers, shaking with fear as the whispering and shadows seemed to fill the house. I stayed awake all night, too terrified to sleep. When morning finally came, the shadows were gone and the house was silent, but I never forgot the old woman's warning. To this day, I avoid walking alone at night and always keep my lights on, fearing the return of the shadows on Elm Street. It was a foggy night when I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. Midnight had just struck, and the thick fog made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. I walked down Pine Street, where the old creaky houses stood silently, shrouded in mist. As I walked, I heard footsteps behind me, faint but distinct. I stopped and turned around, but all I could see was the dense fog. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination, and continued walking. But the footsteps resumed, closer this time. My heart began to race. I quickened my pace, hoping to lose whoever was following me. The footsteps matched my speed, growing louder and more insistent. I turned onto Birch Lane, a narrow, poorly lit street, hoping to lose my pursuer in the maze of houses. Suddenly, a tall, dark figure emerged from the fog in front of me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes boring. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure remained silent, and a chill ran down my spine. I slowly backed away, but the figure took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between us. Panicking, I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the foggy night. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps heavy and relentless. I darted into an alley, hoping to find a place to hide. The alley was dark and narrow, with trash bins and old crates scattered about. I crouched behind a large bin, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. The footsteps grew louder, and I held my breath, praying the figure wouldn't find me. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, I heard a low, raspy voice whisper, "I see you." My blood turned to ice, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I screamed and bolted out of the alley, not daring to look back. I ran all the way home, my lungs burning and my legs aching. When I finally reached my front door, I burst inside and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. I collapsed on the floor, shaking with fear. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows, and I felt as if the figure was still out there, watching me. I stayed up all night, too afraid to sleep, jumping at every sound. The next morning, the fog had lifted, and everything seemed normal. But I knew I would never forget the terror I felt that night. To this day, I avoid walking in the fog, always fearing the return of the figure in the mist on Pine Street. One night, I was walking home from my friend's house on Maple Street. It was close to midnight, and the street was eerily quiet. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. I had always felt safe in our neighborhood, but that night, something felt different. The street lights flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the pavement. As I walked, I noticed a shadow moving quickly behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. I shook my head, thinking it was just my imagination. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly, I heard a low whisper behind me. My heart raced as I spun around again, but the street was empty. Feeling more uneasy by the minute, I quickened my pace. I was only a few blocks from home. I just needed to get there and lock the door. As I reached the corner of Maple and Oak, I saw a figure standing under a flickering streetlight. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat and a hat that obscured his face. His presence sent a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore him and kept walking, but as I passed, he spoke in a deep, raspy voice. "Lost, are we?" I didn't reply and kept moving, my heart pounding in my chest. The man didn't follow, but I could feel his eyes on me. I turned the corner and broke into a run. When I finally reached my house, I fumbled with my keys, glancing over my shoulder to see if the man was following me. Thankfully, he wasn't there. I rushed inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, trying to calm my racing heart. I thought I was safe, but then the phone rang. I answered, my voice shaking. "Hello?" The same raspy voice from the street replied, "You can't hide from me." I dropped the phone and backed away, staring at the door. The shadows outside the window seemed to move, and I realized that I might never truly be safe from whatever was lurking on Maple Street that night.